So far, our focus has been purely on the front end. But as you know, most, if not all, Angular applications need a backend. Now, you can build the backend yourself, but that requires learning a different set of technologies and spending a lot of extra time. Another approach is to use Firebase, which is a platform provided by Google for building the backend of web and mobile apps. So in this section, I'm going to show you how to use Firebase as the backend of your Angular applications for storing data. By the end of this section, you'll be able to perform CRUD operations. That means you'll be able to create, read, update, and delete objects in a Firebase database. Now, before we get started, I just want to let you know that this section is purely an introduction to Firebase, and you're not going to be a Firebase expert by the end of this section. Because in this course, our focus is mostly on the front end, and Firebase is a backend platform. Plus, there is more to Firebase than we can cover in one section. So if you want to learn more, you can look at the additional resources that I have provided at the end of this section. Now, let's get started. So at the beginning of this course, we looked at the architecture of web applications. You learned that each web application consists of two parts. The front end, which sits on the client, and we use Angular to build it, and the backend, which sits on the server, and we use a different set of languages and frameworks to build it. This front end talks to the backend to get or save data via a bunch of HTTP services. Behind these HTTP services, we have one or more databases, such as SQL Server, Mongo, Raven, and so on. This is the architecture behind most web applications out there. Now, as an Angular or a front-end developer, you don't have to worry about building the backend. That's the job of a backend or a full-stack developer. But that aside, building backends is time-consuming, and that's where Firebase shines. With Firebase, you can build a backend for your Angular apps in less than a minute. You get a super fast, scalable, and real-time database in the cloud, and a library to talk to this database in your Angular apps. On top of that, you also get authentication, cloud messaging for sending notifications, storage for storing your files, and analytics. Many modern and popular applications out there use Firebase as their backend. The beauty of Firebase is that it provides libraries for iOS, Android, JavaScript, and C++. So today you can use it as the backend of your Angular app, but tomorrow you may decide to build a mobile app for iOS or Android. Then all you have to do is to build that new client app and let that app talk to your backend. And with this, you can quickly deliver a cross-platform solution to your users. Now, what about the pricing? You might be thinking, all these amazing services, they should come with a big price tag, right? Well, not really. You can get most of these features for free. And if your application grows, you can either pay $25 a month or use their pay-as-you-go subscription model. To learn more about their pricing, head over to firebase.google.com/pricing. All right, now let's create our first Firebase project. So I want you to head over to firebase.google.com, log in, and then on the navigation bar, you're going to see a button called Go to Console. Alternatively, you can simply head over to console.firebase.google.com. Once you log in on this page, you can create a new Firebase project. So scroll down, add a project. Let's give our project a name. I'm going to call this Firebase Demo. Then select the country or region and create project. Okay, here we are on the homepage of our new project. You can see that you can add Firebase to your iOS, Android, and web applications. And when you click these, you can see the documentation about the steps involved. Now, the documentation for adding this to a web app is just a general JavaScript documentation. Adding Firebase to an Angular app is slightly different, and that's what I'm going to show you in this section. Now, let's have a quick tour of some of the features you get here. So, on the left side, on the sidebar, we have our database. So this is where all our data will be stored. Now, if you have any experience with databases, you know that in general, we have two types of databases: relational databases and NoSQL databases, which are also called document databases. In relational databases, we have tables and relationships, and each table has one or more records. We refer to the combination of these tables and their structure as the schema of the database. In NoSQL databases, we don't have schema. In fact, we don't have any tables, we don't have any columns. Our database is essentially a tree of nodes. Each node is a key value pair. Now, this value can be a simple primitive value, or it can be a complex object. MongoDB is an example of a NoSQL database. Firebase databases are also NoSQL databases. Let's have a look at an example. So here we have the root node of our database. Under this, I'm going to add a node called courses. So this is for listing all the courses in our application. Now you can see that each node has a name and value. Now I don't want to assign a primitive value to this node. I want to make this a complex object. So I click this plus here, and you can see now we have a child under courses. Again, this child has a name and value. I'm going to set the name to 1 and the value to course 1. So now you see we have a tree of nodes in our database. I'm going to add another child node under courses. So here, plus, I'm going to set the name to 2 and the value to course 2. Now, one thing I want you to pay attention to here is that each node in this database can have a different structure. That's why we refer to this kind of database as a NoSQL or schema-less database. Here's an example. So all our courses have an ID and a name. Now I'm going to add another course here. I'm going to set the ID to 3, but for the value, I'm not going to use a string like course 3. I want the value to be a complex object. So I'm going to click this plus. Now we have a child under this node. Here in this child node, I'm going to set the name to title and the value to course 3. Now look at the result. So our third course is an object, and this object has a property called title. You can add another property here under 3. Let's set the author, Mosh Hamedani. Now we have 2 properties, and let's add one more here. So let's set the price. This time I'm going to use a number. Let's say $150. So what I want you to note here is that each node in this database can have a different structure. Our first 2 courses are simple key value pairs, values are strings, but our third course, its value is a complex object with 3 properties: author, price, and title. If you have never worked with this kind of database before, this might be new to you, it might be a little bit scary, but in fact, this is extremely powerful, super fast, and super scalable. But the downside of this structure is that it's not optimized for reporting. So unlike traditional relational databases where we can join multiple tables and run complex queries against them, we cannot do that here. So if that's what you need in your applications, perhaps you need to use a relational database, or if you want to use Firebase or another NoSQL database like Mongo, you can use this as your main database, but set up some background job that takes all the data from this NoSQL database into a relational database for reporting. So this is our Firebase database. Next, we're going to get back to our Angular project, install Firebase, and work with this database. In this section, I'm going to start on a new Angular project. So let's generate a new project using Angular CLI, ng-new, and call this Firebase-demo. All right, our project is ready. Now let's go to Firebase demo. Here we need to install a couple of node packages. So npm install. The first one is Firebase, which is the standard Firebase library written in JavaScript. And the second one is Angular Fire 2, which is a library for working with Firebase in an Angular 2 Plus app. Okay, now add the save flag. Okay, all the packages installed successfully. Now let's open this project in VS Code. Now here under the source folder, we have environments. And here we have two files for storing our configuration settings for the production and development environment. So open up environment.ts. So you can see here we are exporting an object called environment. And this object has a simple property called production that is set to false. Here we need to copy some settings about our Firebase project. So back on Firebase console, if you go to the overview page for your project, back here, click this button, add Firebase to your web app. Now here on this config object, you can see a bunch of properties, such as API key, auth domain, database URL, and so on. We're going to copy all these properties, only the properties, nothing else here. Okay, so copy these. Now back here, add a comma. Here we add a new key, Firebase, set it to an object, and then paste all those properties that we copied, like this. So this is our Firebase database for the development environment. In a real-world scenario, you should have a separate Firebase backend for your production environment. So then you go to Firebase, create another project. That project has its own settings. Then you would copy all these settings in environment.prod.ts. So it's a very similar file, but the production property here is set to true. Okay? Now don't worry about these various environments. We're going to look at them later when it comes to deployment. So let's continue adding Firebase to this project. Next, we need to go to app.module. Here in the imports array, we need to import one or more modules of Angular Fire. But for some reason that I don't know, my auto import plugin doesn't work here. So we need to explicitly import these modules on the top. Import Angular Fire module from Angular Fire 2. Then in the imports array, we add Angular Fire module dot initialize app. Now here we need to pass the configuration object for our Firebase database. So we need to import the environment object that was exported in the other module. So environment, auto import. Let's look on the top. So this is our environment object imported from the environments folder / environment module. And here we have all the settings for our development environment. Now back here in the imports array, this environment object has a property that we just added called Firebase. And this is an object that includes all the settings for Firebase, okay? Now this Angular Fire module is the main module in Angular Fire. There are additional modules such as Angular Fire Database, Angular Fire Authentication, and so on. So here, because we're going to work with the database, we should also import the Angular Fire Database module. So once again, on the top, we need to import another module. This one is called Angular Fire Database module. And we're going to import this from Angular Fire 2 / database. Okay? Then we add this to the imports array after initializing the app. So Angular Fire Database module. Now we have successfully installed Firebase and Angular Fire in our project. Next, I'm going to show you how to get the data from our Firebase database. So earlier, we added these courses in our Firebase database. We have 3 courses. The first 2 are simple key value pairs. The values are a string. And the third course, its value is a complex object with 3 properties. So you can see that in a NoSQL database, each node can have a different structure. Now, this is powerful because it allows you to quickly build your database without having a schema. It allows you to go faster. It increases your productivity. But also, on the flip side, if you don't manage it properly, you can run into issues. So let's see how we can read these courses and display them on a page. Back in the terminal, first I'm going to serve our application. Now here in VS Code, let's go to app.component. So here we have only one component, and I'm going to display all our courses here. In a real world scenario, you would have a separate component like courses component, okay? Now, we don't need this title here. Let's delete this. We add a constructor. Here we need to inject one of Angular Fire classes. Now, once again, my auto import plugin cannot recognize this. So we need to go on the top and explicitly import Angular Fire Database. Note that this is Angular Fire Database, not Angular Fire Database module. We only imported the module in app module, okay? Now here we need to import this from Angular Fire 2/database. Okay, now let's add this to the constructor. So DB of type Angular Fire Database. Now this object has a couple of methods. List for reading a list of objects, and an object for reading one object. Here we want to get a list of objects. So let's call this method. As the first argument, we need to pass the path to our node in Firebase. So starting from the root, we have another node here called courses. So this is the path to our courses node. Now look at the return type of this method. It returns Firebase list observable. So Firebase list observable is like an observable, but it has additional methods that you're going to learn about in this section. So we're going to treat this like an observable. You're going to subscribe to it. Here we get the courses, and we can use this to set a field in this class. So let me define courses here. It's an any array. And then in the subscribe method, we can set this.courses to this courses. But also I'm going to show this in the console. This.courses. That's it. Now let's test the application up to this point. So back in the browser. Okay, here's our homepage. Let's take a look at the console. We have an error. Permission denied at courses. Client doesn't have permission to access the desired data, because by default, only authenticated users can read from or write to your Firebase database. Now in this section, we're not going to worry about authentication. That's more of an advanced topic that I have covered in my other Angular course called Build Enterprise Applications with Angular. So let's simplify things and focus on the fundamentals. Back to our Firebase console. On the database page, on the top, you can see this tab called Rules. So here we have a couple of rules for reading and writing data. As you can see, these rules are defined as a JSON object. This object has two properties, .read and .write, and their value is an expression. Here, auth not null is something that Firebase understands. It means only users who are authenticated can read and write data. So I'm going to temporarily change this to true. That means anyone can read from this database. Now, in a real world scenario, you will want to open up read access to certain nodes in your database. So you can allow anonymous users to read from these nodes, but you can have other nodes that have higher level of security. Perhaps only authenticated users or users within a specific role can read from these nodes. Again, we don't want to worry about this now, so let's move forward. Now, every time you make a change here, you need to publish your changes. Okay, done. Now back in our Angular app, refresh this page and look at the console. So this is what we get from Firebase, an array of 3 objects. Let's take a look. You can see each object has 2 properties, $value and $key. Now look at the second object here. Once again, we have $value and $key. But let's take a look at the third object. This is our third course that has additional properties. Look at the structure of this object. Here we have additional properties like author, price, and title. Note that we no longer have the $value property. So it's not like $value is a complex object and that object has these properties. No, it's not like that. These properties are part of our course object. Now, if I want to display the name of these courses, I'm going to have some difficulty because the title of the first two courses is stored in the $value property, but in the third course, the title is stored in the title property. So that's why I said that if you don't manage your NoSQL database properly, you're going to run into issues. So back in our Firebase database, I'm going to delete the third node, delete, and add a new node that is consistent with the other nodes under courses. So 3 and course 3. Okay, now let's display these on our Angular app. So let's go to app.component.html. Delete all the markup here. We need a UL and LI. We're going to use the ng4 directive. Let course of courses. And here we use interpolation. Course.$value. Back in the browser. And we successfully read data from our Firebase database. Now let me show you my favorite feature of Firebase. Firebase databases are real-time. That means anytime the data in the database is modified, the changes are reflected in our client apps automatically. So here's an example. Currently we have 3 courses. Now I'm going to go back to our Firebase console and add a new course here for course 4. Now back to our Angular app. Course 4 is here, and I didn't even refresh the page. So the data appeared here automatically. Similarly, if I go back to our Firebase console and delete this course, now back in our Angular app, look, the course is gone. And we didn't write any code for implementing this kind of behavior. All we did was subscribing to a list in Firebase. Without Firebase, if we wanted to implement a real-time app, we would have to write a lot more code for it. So this is something that you get with Firebase out of the box. This is especially important if you have an application that involves multiple users. So as one user modifies the data, the changes are immediately visible to other users. A real-world example of this is if you want to build a chat application, Firebase is going to be your best friend. Because as soon as a user sends a message, the other user is going to see it immediately. So in the last lecture, you learned that Firebase databases are real-time. Now let's take a closer look at this feature. So back in our Angular app, here we have 3 courses, and I've cleared the console. Now let's go back to our Firebase database. Here I'm going to add a new course for course 4. Now, back in our Angular app, course 4 is here, and then let's take a look at the console. So when we added the 4th course, we got a new array of all the courses from the server. Let's try this one more time. I'm going to go back here. This time I'm going to delete course 4. Now, back in our Angular app, course 4 is gone. Let's take a look at the console. We got a new array of courses. This array has 3 elements. So this is what I want you to note here. Every time we make a change to the courses node, whether we add an object or remove an object or modify an existing object, we get the entire array of courses from the server. The reason for this is because we have subscribed to the courses list in our database. Now, in terms of the performance, you don't have to worry about this. Even though we get the entire list, Firebase is optimized for this kind of scenarios. But there is something tricky you need to be aware of. Currently, we have only one component in this application, app component, right? Now, in a real-world application, we're going to have tens or hundreds of components, and we're going to have routing and navigation. So the user may navigate to the courses page, and on that page, we're going to have a subscription to the courses list in Firebase. Now, if they navigate away from that page, this subscription is still in memory. So every time something happens to that node, we are going to get the list of courses from the database, even though the user is not on the courses page. So if you don't manage this properly, you're going to end up with memory leaks. That means your application is going to consume more memory than it needs. Now, to clarify, in the section about consuming HTTP services, we subscribe to the observables returned from the HTTP class. There, we didn't have to worry about this because these observables terminate when we get the response from the server. Because in those situations, we get only one response object from our server. But here, when working with Firebase, we don't have one response from the server. Every time there is a change in the nodes we have subscribed to, you're going to be notified. So in the next lecture, I'm going to show you how to prevent memory leaks in your applications when using Firebase.
Hi, thank you for watching my Angular tutorial. If you enjoyed this video, please like it and share it with others. Also, you can subscribe to my channel for free new videos every week. This video is part of my complete Angular course with almost 30 hours of high quality content where you will learn everything about Angular from the basic to the advanced topics all in one course, so you don't have to jump from one tutorial to another. In case you're interested, you can get this course with a big discount using the link in the video description. And if not, that's perfectly fine. Continue watching as the next section is coming up.